About 6.3, which is square root functions and inequalities. Now on this part right here, what we're gonna do is before we start talking about any of this, right? Remember, this is the parent function of any square root function. All right, so remember, y is equal to the square root of x is the parent function. All right, and I picked this key points. Now remember, I picked this x values because these are perfect square, which means I can take the square root and get a whole number back. So the square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2, square root of 1 is 1, square root of 0 is 0. All right, so to graph this, if you remember that 0.5, all you have to do is multiply only the y terms by 0.5, which is the same thing as dividing by 2, and that's how you should be able to graph it. So the first point is not going to change, 0, 0, which is right here. The next point should be 1, but instead of having 1 as my y coordinate, I'm going to multiply this 1 times 0.5, or multiply it times a half, so you get a half. The next one should be 4, and then half of 2 is 1, so I have 4, 1, so that's the point right here. And I'm going to go ahead and just graph it. Right, the domain of this would be, remember, it starts right here and goes to the right, so you have two ways to write it. You can write x is greater than or equal to 0, or you can write between 0 and positive infinity for that, right? So it doesn't matter how you write it, just pick one. Right, the range now, remember, we're talking about how low and how high something gets. The lowest point right here is also 0. And because as this graph moves to the right, y keeps increasing, going up, so this is also y is greater than 0, or between 0 and infinity for that one. Alright, so let's go ahead and go to number 2, for example. Number 2, we have a vertical stretch of 3 and it's negative, which means that it's going to look like this, but it's going to be reflected over the x-axis. Right, the first point is still going to be 0, 0. The next point should be 1, negative 3. And again, the reason that I know that is because all I'm doing is multiplying the y coordinates times negative 3. Alright, so the next one should be 4 and negative 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Negative 6. Alright, so that's what it looks like. Now the domain for this one would be x is less than or equal to 0. Remember, excuse me, that is not right. X is greater than or equal to 0 because it's going to the right. Okay, x gets bigger as you go to the right. And the range is going to be y is less than or equal to 0. Remember that because I start right here and I'm going down. If I'm going down, if that graph keeps smaller, the y coordinate is actually getting smaller and smaller as you go down. So y is less than or equal to 0. Alright, let's go to number 3. On number 3, remember that x is a liar, so I'm going to start at negative 1, positive 2 for your vertex. So we have negative 1, positive 2. And it's also negative. Right, and if it's negative, that means that it's going to be reflected. So essentially I'm going to follow these points, except for all the y's are going to be negative, and this is my fake origin, if you remember. Okay, so we're going to go down 1 over 1. Let's see, 4, negative 2. So from here would be, that point would be 0, 0. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and down 2. And then let's just leave it at that. We can also do 9, negative 3, but let's just, for the sake of time, let's not do that. All right, so that's what it looks like. The domain, remember the x coordinate of that point is negative 1, so now all you get to decide is this greater than or less than. Now it's going to the right, so it's greater than. Now the range, again, now figure out the y coordinate of that point, which in this case is 2. And then now we're going to talk about which, is it going up or down. As it goes to the right, it's actually going down. So this is going to be less than or equal to 2. Alright, so that's it for that. Now we're going to talk about inverses again, but they're a little more complicated. They're not just linear functions like they were in the previous section. So what we're going to do here is, again, remember, to find the inverse of these, we have to switch the x and y. So we're going to write x is equal to the square root of y plus 2 plus 6. Now the important thing about this is you must isolate the radical, right? You must get the radical by itself. So before I do anything, I am going to subtract the 6 from both sides. And you cannot touch anything inside the radical until you get rid of it. So the next step now is that I'm going to take, I'm going to go ahead and raise both sides to the power of 2, because this side will get rid of the radical if I do that. Okay, I'm going to come to this side, run out of room right here. So x minus 6 squared, remember you'll be foiling, so I'm going to write it right here really small. Hopefully you can see it. So remember, that is what that means. I have y plus 2 on this side now. Square both sides. When I FOIL this, I would get x squared minus 12x plus 36 is equal to y plus 2. And then now what I have to do is subtract the 2 from both sides. Alright, so when I subtract 2, my inverse is y is equal to x squared minus 12x plus 34. So this is my inverse right here. But not all the time are they that difficult. For example, let's look at number 5. Again, in order to find the inverse, we're going to have to switch the x and y. And then we're going to have to solve, alright? So this one has one tiny little step after. So we're going to start off by adding the 4 in this case. And then we have this. And then now, you kind of have two choices. I'm kind of just sighing because I know that a lot of you guys don't like to have too many choices here. But your choices are to multiply or divide, both sides by 2 and then squaring it. Or go ahead and square at this point. But let's just go ahead and divide this 2. Really gives you the same answer. And then now I'm going to square both sides after that. Again, so I'm going to have to square this right here. I'm going to have to square this right here. Either way is not too terrible, hopefully. If I square, remember, so what's going on here, if you remember this from previous sections, that's going to square this, and this is also going to get squared. Okay? And I have to FOIL that top part. So this would be x squared plus 8x plus 16 over 4 is equal to y, and that's my inverse. That's my answer. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and go to number 6. 6 is the same idea, but this one's easier because the radical, right, the square root, is already by itself. So remember, always step 1 is to try to get the square root by itself. So we're going to go ahead and square this. I'm going to square that. Alright, so now we have y squared. Excuse me, I forgot to do this first. My bad. Let me rewind on that. First of all, I have to write this as x is equal to the square root of 3y plus 4. Now I can go ahead and square it. So this would be x squared is equal to 3y plus 4. Now I'm gonna go ahead and just solve for y. So I'm gonna subtract the 4 from both sides, and then I'm gonna divide by 3. So my answer is x squared minus 4 over 3 is equal to y. So that's it for that one. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to this part right here. Okay, so now on this one, it's sort of like what we just did, but it's backwards. Okay, so we're gonna do the first thing we did at the beginning, which is we're gonna switch the x and y. Okay. We're gonna switch the x and y, and then now, just like the other one, our goal here is to isolate the squared, the term that is being squared. So we're gonna subtract the 6 first. So we have y minus 2 squared. Right, and then now to get rid of the square, I'm going to take the square root. So this right here would be the square root of x minus 6 is equal to y minus 2. So essentially what we did is we got rid of that other stuff. And this is actually a plus or minus. I don't know if I'm really going to be able to make it keep up with it, but now we're going to add the 2 to both sides. And remember, we cannot add that 2 to anything inside the radical, so all we can do is just rewrite it. Alright, so we're going to write it as 2 plus or minus the square root of x minus 6. And that's pretty much it. That is the inverse, if you will. Alright, let's go to number 8. Same idea. We're going to start off by switching the x and y, and then we're going to solve for y. So we're going to start off by adding 3. We have 2y squared. Again, we want to isolate the term that's being squared. In this case, it's just y squared. So we're going to go ahead and divide by 2. Right, and then we're going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides, because to get rid of the squared, I have to take the square root. So this is just going to be x plus 3 over 2, and this is just going to be y, plus or minus here. Alright, now on last but not least, number 9. Alright, so number 9, same idea. I want to first of all, to find the inverse, I have to switch the x and y. This would be y plus 1 squared minus 2. Alright, so now I want to isolate the square term. We're going to start off by adding 2. Alright, so we're going to add 2. So we have x plus 2 is equal to negatives. I'm going to write it at 0.5 only because I want to bother you. I'm just kidding. Remember that negative 0.5 is actually the same thing as negative 1/2. So if you have a calculator, it's really not a big deal. You can divide both sides by negative 0.5. You can. It'll give you the same thing. But remember that if you did not have a calculator, this is the same thing as negative 1/2 y plus 1 squared. Now remember, you cannot distribute that because that's a power, right? The order of operations says you would do the power first. So to get rid of that negative 1/2, I'm going to multiply both sides times a negative 2. So I'm going to multiply all of this times a negative 2. And it turns out that if you would have divided here by a negative 0.5, it's the same thing. Alright, it's the same thing, but most students your age don't know that. So remember, this is going to cancel all of that, so I end up with y plus 1 squared. And then now I'm going to take the square root. Alright, to get rid of that. So this is going to be plus or minus the square root of negative 2x minus 4 y plus 1. Alright, and then we're going to go ahead and just subtract the 1 from each side. And that's your answer. Okay, so the last are weird. I probably talk about the plus or minus part in class, so don't fret too much if you're looking at it like, where did that plus or minus come from? Remember, when we take a square root, when we're solving for something and we take the square root, we have to put plus or minus. Okay, so we can talk about that in class.